The festive season can create so much pressure. There's money problems, family issues, there's corporate events you have to attend, there's all these different functions, what to get for Christmas presents, there's pressure from your children. All these things weigh us down. But does it really need to be this way? Julian Roberts and I ponder how to make the festive season and Christmas the most awesome ever.
Welcome to Share.care, an all-inclusive community sharing experience, strength, and hope to create strong, healthy, and inspiring relationships. Share.care communities work toward every individual feeling safe, valued, and heard, free from the threat of danger, pain, or harm. Each episode, founder Damian Andrews explores the principles underpinning Share.care and invites expert special guests to share their knowledge so you can easily reap the benefits so many others experience. You hold the choice to create your future. Let it be with strong, healthy, and inspiring relationships.
Hello and welcome to a Pondering Life episode of the Share.care podcast. Our belief is that global peace starts at home. Feeling safe, valued, and heard gives you a foundation to confidently step out and make the world a happier and safer place for everyone. Because in today's world, it's in your own selfish best interest to help others. Now today, Julian Roberts and I discuss avoiding stress, pressure, and burnout in the festive season. G'day, Julian.
Good to see you, Damien.
How's things your way? Getting all ready for Christmas?
Yeah, we started last night. We got our tree up yesterday, which is the 1st of December, and even watched a sort of a Christmas movie.
So which movie did you watch?
It was Nativity 2.
Nice.
I don't think you've seen that. So it's like a comedy, sort of modern day version of the Nativity, but in a school. But yeah, no, it's really good actually.
Yeah, I'm a bit jealous. It is the first here, and we haven't got our Christmas tree up. That's the plan for tomorrow. It's just been a bit of a busy day, and last day of school for the little boy. And well, he's not so little anymore. He's like 6 foot, so he can't really be counted as little.
I was going to say he's not so little, is
he? Yeah, for 14-year-old, he's doing pretty well. For the height wise. So tomorrow is the day we get the Christmas tree out like yourself and get it up.
And do you make a bit of a thing of that Christmas tree going up, and I don't know, music playing, all that sort of stuff going on, food?
Yeah, I'm a bit of a Christmas tragic. I have Christmas carols playing usually, and I found some really cool ones. They're like epic Christmas carols, so it's kind of like watching a superhero movie with Christmas carols. Have you seen the new movie? There's it's called Violent Night coming out. It's actually, which sounds more horrible than it is, but it's a spoof on this family get kidnapped, and then while Santa's coming, they mistake Santa for being an ordinary person and hijack Santa, and he goes on a rampage to try and
oh right, okay,
do justice. I saw the trailer for it last night, so it looks.
Is that in the cinemas, or is that on like a sort of Netflix or something? Or
yeah, it's in the well, here it's in the cinema. It starts tomorrow, so or today or tomorrow. But yeah, I'm looking forward to checking
that out for that.
Yeah, a bit of a comedy sort of thing, but yeah, no, definitely a Christmas tragic. I love to wrap up the presents, get have lots of presents under the trees, and have the tree. I even get because I'm a bit of a Lego tragic as well. I get all the Christmas Lego and I have that all set up around the tree with the Christmas tree.
Oh, really?
So I don't know if that's a good thing.
That's good. Anyway. I mean, I love the build up to Christmas, and in some ways more than the Christmas day, because it almost becomes a bit of a high expectation, doesn't it, of the Christmas day in itself, almost pushing everything into one day and making sure it's all going to be perfect. Actually, I almost not desensitized, but almost spread it and thinking, okay, I'm just going to enjoy this season. Tonight we always start with some friends at the beginning of Advent, and we always meet for a curry every year. And that's always like a signal for us. It's the start, and we start to just embrace it, whether that's through networking events, through family, friends, and just almost just enjoy the build up, and go around and see the Christmas lights in your city. And I just, yeah, starting to wear your Christmas jumpers and all that sort of stuff. And and I always try and spread it, because I think it's important, because I think it becomes a little bit like all focused on this one day.
Yeah.
A little bit of like, laying laying all your money on black at a roulettes, and it doesn't always go. So actually, it's not that I'm looking for it.
Black 25, is it?
Yeah, exactly. I'd rather spread my bets and enjoy. And it also goes back to, I think for me, it's also in that we often get caught up in our mindsets, isn't it, of thinking ahead all the time.
Yeah.
And obviously, I'm going to talk about anxiety, but that can create the anxiety because you get a bit out of control, because you're not in the moment. You're thinking things ahead, which you don't know what's going to happen exactly. And for me, it goes back to that premise of going in the moment, enjoy today, enjoy this moment right now, whatever that might be. And when you're in the moment, you feel at peace, you feel in control, and also you enjoy it a lot more as well.
Do you think that's what, because when we're talking about, Christmas and stress and pressure and burnout, do you think that's what really causes a lot of that? Well, we put all this pressure on not only that day, but all the things that have to happen on that day.
I think it is. I think it's that. It's the expectations as well of other people, and we have all the challenges of family and what you ought to do and everything else, work, and the fact that depending on where you work, but majority of people are off broadly for a weekish, over that sort of period.
Yeah.
And you're working 3 out of 4 the weeks normally work, and therefore everything's getting squashed into quite a tight time scale. And I think it's that sense of like any stress predominantly is driven out of something where you're not in control. And so when you suddenly pan yourself ahead of the future of the Christmas day or whatever, another event, you suddenly kick into an anxiety because you're thinking, well, I can't control that, I'm not there. And then suddenly you spiral. And I think that's what the root cause is. And then, and that's why I always say, try and get back into the moments, and you get a bit more of a perspective on things. But I think that's the biggest stress, is actually the sense of the expectations ahead of you.
That sense of control too. Because I don't know about you, but from my perspective, with my family, the broader family, there's always those couple of people that are a bit of a, they're always going to do something. My uncle is particular, and I know he's not listening, so I can say what I want about him.
He may be listening, who knows?
Exactly. Yeah. There's an uncle who's always, he's really, nothing's right, and he's always opinionated, and so we have the Christmas day, and it's always, there's this bit of tension there, and I kind of it used to bother me a lot, and because I would get into it, and it's like, why are you doing that? And now I kind of go as an observer sort of thing, to just see what, and try and treat it as a bit of humor. And that, because it used to get really upset about it. It was like, why are they doing this? Why are they behaving that way, and wrecking, a family dinner sort of thing. Yeah. So I just wonder, from your perspective, have you had that kind of experience, and do you have family members that cause that kind of pressure for you as well?
Well, I suppose for me, I got divorced a number of years ago, and I still had young children, and they lived with their mum. And even though I saw my kids, quite fairly in the week and everything else through that time, spent a lot of time with them.
Yeah.
Christmas always became a very emotive time, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
Who has the children for Christmas, and it becomes like a negotiation, a bargaining tool, and it used to get quite stressful, and I used to get really, quite, upset and thinking, I'm not going to see my kids for Christmas, all this sort of stuff. And so I suppose what I started to do, not that I gave up on trying, because I did use opportunities. What I started to do is, firstly, I reframed it as, well, it's only a day, and it doesn't matter. And so I started to do Christmas early with them, like the weekend before. My wife and now would take them away up to London or whatever it is, or
Mm.
whatever it is, we start to do things separately. And what that did, it created, I was in control, and
Yeah.
it just meant that my girls had two Christmases, one with the dad, one with the mum, and whether it was on the 25th or the 19th, whatever, it didn't really matter.
Yeah.
And I just reframed it as that, and took the emotion out of it, and the fact that it has to be on the special Christmas day. Well, actually, no. The key thing about this is
Yeah.
spending time with my children and then investing that. And so I just did that. But then I also just started to just take opportunities as well throughout the Christmas season, and
Mm.
whether we say, oh, there's an opportunity to go some ice skating or something, and so and this is me spreading the Christmas piece, and rather than just focusing on that Christmas day,
Yeah.
actually I take my girls, ice skating for the afternoon, and we'd have a meal out or whatever it is, and so that really helped me reframe it. And I know people might be listening now who are thinking, actually, I have all that tension of the family thing. Just it is tough, and it is, and certainly the dad, it really is hard. But that really helped me.
Yeah, that's a good point, because for me, it was Christmas was something that I was never, because a similar sort of thing, had a relationship breakup, and with I was never willing to compromise on the Christmas side of things. It was like it you know it doesn't get missed. Yeah, both parents get that, and however that's written up, I'm not sure with the different laws in different countries, but in Australia, there's certain parenting orders, and from my perspective, it was always written up as it's split equally over that period, and I was never going to let that go, never going to change that, and I think I became quite stubborn. Maybe I was overly stubborn about it, but then it just kind of fell into that is the situation, and that's what's happening. So I don't know if that was, a way of detensioning, or made me more tension to get to where it was to be. But yeah, it's
And also
reframing. It's
good to,
probably a
it's
better
good.
idea.
Yeah, it's good to fight for things, but I think sometimes it's that sort of thing sometimes in our belly of not giving up on things, and I think
Mhm.
sometimes we get to a point where it's not. It's okay. I had a conversation recently about quitting,
Yeah,
and even you mentioned the word quitting to somebody, it's got a negative overtone to it, hasn't
yeah,
it? But actually, sometimes in life, not that you quit on your kids, I'm not saying that at all, but sometimes you get to a point, and it's not about resilience, not about grit, determination. It's actually, this scenario I need to change something out of this scenario, so I'm going to quit it and move on to something else.
yeah.
And I think sometimes that comes in the reframe as well, as what I did. But
Mm,
I remember hearing this person talk about this, is that I think the greatest sort of poker players
yeah.
are the ones that know when to fold,
Yes. There's a Kenny Rogers
rather
song
than
about that, isn't it? No,
keeping going.
yes. Know when to hold them, know when to fold them.
Yes, exactly. So I think it's, and not that we give up on fighting for our rights and our kids and all
Yeah,
that, but actually you might have a better time by just shifting it, and actually because the kids will feel the tension as well, wouldn't they? And that's that,
yeah.
or anybody feels the tension. And but yes, it is. It's all that, I think, other people's expectations, isn't it, as well? The complexity of family, and you should be with here on Boxing Day and here on this day and that day and everything else. It's, yeah, quite
How
tricky at
much
times.
Yeah, how much do we take on of that? Because now, I said, from my perspective, I've kind of shifted in that regard with Christmas. Sometimes I go and see my family, sometimes I don't. Other times we've been overseas, and just gone, we're going somewhere else, and just made that shift, and consciously decided, well, it's our Christmas.
Mm,
And later, when I was a single dad, it was like, well, it's my Christmas, and I'm going to be doing this, and obviously work around the parameters that were there, but
mm.
we're gonna do this, and that, not worry about what the broader family thought. But that takes courage, I think, to go, when you've got to step out of it.
I think it does, and I think particularly when you sort of leave home and you get married in those early days,
Yeah,
you feel quite I'm saying vulnerable, but yeah, to try and push the boundaries of and create your own boundary and your own way of doing things does take, I think, a huge amount of courage. And I don't think for me, settled that until probably about 10 years ago, really.
Yeah.
But I think it goes back to people. It seems really selfish, but actually, and it's a real helpful thing, even just in general life anyway, is about, make sure you look after yourself first. I mean, we know the analogy, on an airplane, they always say, put your own mask on first before you help somebody else.
That's a good point.
And it sounds really, oh, that's very twee, but actually it's really true. I think even in a work context, I think we need to look after ourselves first before we try and help other people, before we give to other people. You can't give out of something that you're empty. If you're empty, you can't do it. You can't be very useful. And so I think it goes back to that, what's right for you. And yes, be mindful, be respectful. And, I've looked for other solutions because my mum won't be listening to this, but my mum has been quite challenging at Christmas at times.
Yeah.
And various scenarios of inviting her down, all that. And it's just not been the greatest. And I don't think she's really enjoyed it herself. And so what I do now is I give her options. We're going away for Christmas, we're hiring a cottage up in the north of England, and we're near my wife's family, and I'm inviting them for Christmas Day. And I invited my mum for that, just for the Christmas lunch. But she declined because she doesn't like travelling dark, all that sort of, which is fair enough. Yeah. So we are going to meet.
Was that part of where the location was chosen because it was going to involve traveling at night?
No. Yeah, as far away.
I have done that. I'm going to be honest. I have done that. Strategically chosen something because I know someone won't go there. So.
Well, there is. I knew. So, because I said, "Oh, we're going to be 2-3 o'clock," and by the time we finish, it'd be 5 or 6 o'clock, and I knew it'd be dark, and she couldn't stay because there wasn't any room for us to stay. And so she said, "Oh, I'm not sure about driving." And I said, "Look, fine." I said, "What we'll do, we'll drive up. On the way up, we'll stop for coffee, lunch, whatever, because we go past her house almost on the way through."
Yeah.
And so she's happy with that, and that's a nice compromise. I'm seeing her a few days before, and that works, and that feels I'm in control. I'm looking, because I didn't want my mum. I could go and get a place, have a mum stay, and then gets to the day she doesn't turn up.
Yeah.
Or she turns up and it's miserable, and we have 2 days of just not very nice conversations. And so I thought, no, I want to have a good Christmas, and I want to enjoy it. Yeah. And so that's what I do. And I think it's like you do. I think it's good to this is what I'm doing. And then you go, okay, respectfully, I can see you before Christmas. My brother and I have organised things before Christmas as a family all together, and that's worked really well, actually.
Yeah.
I think that also sort of takes the sting out of all these things as well, rather than chucking it into Christmas Day, Boxing Day. Just spread it beforehand. Do things beforehand.
Yeah, I like that, spreading it out.
Definitely. I've done stuff with my family 3 or 4 weeks before Christmas. We went away for a weekend. Friends, just key people, and again, you have to plan these things because obviously, as we already know, we're whatever just over 3 weeks away.
Yeah,
I mean, it's scary. It's scary how quickly it comes and goes. But yeah, definitely spread your bets.
Yeah, and
I'm not a gambler, by the way. I keep talking about poker and gambling. I'm not a gambler as such. It's just a good point to talk about.
No, I mean, I relate to that from what you're talking, because I don't gamble either. It's something that I think I saw the probabilities, and the probability was you're going to lose. So it was like, I just couldn't get into it from that perspective. But I relate to the analogies though. But yeah, I always found that. But did you have because I look at and I hear this where people have these traditions, and I know from my family's perspective, when I think back to when I was a kid, like my mum and dad, well, my dad's dad, my granddad, he was very adamant.
Sorry, Damien, you cut out there. I just literally lost you for about 20 seconds.
Oh, okay. I'm not sure what happened there. Yeah, I was just thinking from a tradition perspective that is imposed by the family, because I look at how I grew up, and my granddad on my dad's side was like every Sunday it was get together for family dinner. So we would go around to my grandmother's and grandmother's house. My auntie, which my dad's sister. So there was my grandmother and grandmother. They had 2 children who got married, and both of them had 4 children. So we had there was that 12, 16 people every Sunday got together, and there was no excuse. My grandfather,
Every week.
yeah, every Sunday, my granddad
Wow.
mandated that, and it was his thing. And maybe that's why I just do what I want now, because my dad says I'm a lot like my granddad. I set the rules. But yeah, it was every Sunday got together. I don't remember what we did for Christmas, whether that was different, but I do remember every Sunday we'd go around, we'd watch the footy game. My grandmother had cooked this beautiful. I always loved the chicken noodle soup that she made, and it was like original hand rolled noodles that she made from scratch.
Wow.
It was beautiful, and I was just thinking through that and how that transition changed, because that pretty much stayed the same all the way up until my grandfather got really sick and then went to hospital, and that's when that stopped. And that's probably why it stopped, is because of that. And then progressively things changed. My parents split up,
Mm.
so that kind of got rid of that a little bit. And I was just wondering, from my perspective, I guess we had things that caused that to change. But for other people, where you've got these traditions that are so ingrained, I mean, is that, do you think, causes people stress? And how would you break out of that? I mean, I just wonder about that.
Yeah, just before, just curious, did that create a real nice family feel, and did you enjoy that every Sunday?
Well, as
Was
a
it?
kid, I mean, I loved it. I mean, but it was because my grandfather died. I think I was 17 or 8. It was just before I joined the army, because I actually saw him the night before he died, and that's when I told him I was joining the army, and he seemed really
Mm.
happy. And then he died that night, so I don't know if he was happy or not. But he, but as a kid growing up, I mean, it was a thing to do, but I don't know that I fully appreciated it then, but it was always enjoyable. There wasn't any fights, in family fights that you normally get, and I think my granddad never would have allowed it to happen anyway.
Mm.
He was he was the type of person that it was. He was in World War Two. I'm Polish, Ukraine. He was Polish and fought in Polish resistance. It wasn't till after he died that we found out that he'd escaped from 2 concentration camps, been shot twice, all these
Wow.
things, because he wouldn't allow people to talk about it. So that was kind of his character. So it's like when we had the Sunday get together, they had to be, you had to be respectful, you had to be polite and kind to each other.
Mm.
So I have very fond memories of that, because it was just lovely playing checkers with my grandfather,
Mm.
just mucking around with the kids in the backyard, that kind of thing. It was, and then sitting
I
around.
mean, to me, that sounds a really. I mean, you obviously have probably a real heart about bringing people together. Perhaps there's
Mm,
no sense of openness, but that was probably a generational thing compared to what it is nowadays.
yeah.
But to me, that I mean, it's it's quite a lot every week, but it sounds like a nice, I guess, intent, isn't it? And I think that's the key thing. All these, when people want to get together and stuff,
Mm,
there's generally something genuinely nice or kind and intent about something, isn't there? There's a generally why they want to do it, I think, and sometimes that gets lost in the control manipulation along the way.
yeah. Well, I think too, probably it was a bit easier too, because my grandmother did all the cooking, so no one needed to cook anything or bring anything, and so because she was always a stay at home, yeah,
Mm.
well, grandmother by that time. So she did all the cooking, so no one had to cook anything. They just turned up. I don't remember. Well, we didn't have dishwashers then. I don't know who did the dishes. I certainly didn't. Somebody did it. But it was, yeah. It's just I was just wondering from that perspective, from my side of things. It was nice tradition. But if you have a tradition but then it's not working, how do you break out of that? I was because I haven't had that experience, and I just wondered how people might break out of that negative type experience.
Yeah, I think it's well, yeah, understanding how it's impacting you, but it's then thinking
Mm.
of is there any alternatives,
Yeah.
and is there any alternatives that you can discuss with people? Because
Mm.
rather than just doing it by stealth, which
Yeah.
is what most people do, slowly creep away and slowly I'm booking a holiday to New York for 5. Oh, it happens to be over Christmas. Oh, sorry, we can't make it this year, and
Yeah.
that can be a strategy because
Yeah.
I think and that can be a way of doing things by stealth
Yeah.
and that can also because once you break it
Yeah.
once or twice, then you're loose in the sense of people's expectations of we always do this every year, don't we? We always meet on Boxing Day. for a walk, at this place, at this pub, and all that. I think it's having, and it sometimes takes a bit of courage having those conversations with people and say, really love what we do together, really loved it, and it's honouring the past rather than, that's why I asked you about what you got from that. And to me, it sounded, from your perspective, was a great thing every week. Although to me, that sounds quite intense once a week. My goodness. But, it's honouring the past and saying, actually, do you know what? I've really enjoyed our time every Sunday together and growing up with this lovely home cooked food, and we played checkers with my grandma, all that wonderful. But we've got other expectations now. We've got other friends we're trying to sort of make contact with. We've got other things we get involved in the community, whatever it may be. And so we're just going to, probably once a month not come or something, and just it's having those conversations, and it's not always received, and and it's making it clear that you're not manipulated or controlled. And just being aware of those conversations and just having a clear boundary. Be respectful, be kind in how you go about that, and then you can sort of shift it. But it's having it's almost grasping that nettle, isn't it? And having that conversation, and that does take a bit of courage, particularly if something's been for years. And it's just, and once you've done it, actually, it can be quite liberating. And then it's like I don't know. We always meet on this every Christmas. You just perhaps just offer some alternatives. We can do it the week before. Or we'll do it separately rather than as a group, or whatever it may be. So certainly have those conversations before you, unless you want to do it by stealth.
Send a letter. But when you're talking about that, having that conversation, because I think it's not a Christmas thing, but I was thinking of, as you were saying that, being able to have that conversation, the courage to have that conversation. But you mentioned about doing it respectfully as well. And it was reminding me of, because I read somewhere that the boy doesn't become a man until his father dies, because then he's got to make his own way. He hasn't got all those opinions coming forward and guidance, that kind of thing. And I was just thinking about my own experience from that. And my dad hasn't died, but in a way he did. I mean, it was over a packet of chips. And it was that sort of stepping away type thing, politely. And because I was staying at my dad's house, I was in between. I sold a house and was buying a new one, but it hadn't settled. So I was staying at my dad's house, and my dad's pretty frugal. So he always bought the no-name brand things, and no-name brand chips. And I bought my own food, and I bought Pringles. And I'm sitting in the kitchen eating these Pringles. My dad walks in and he goes, why'd you buy those chips? They're expensive. And sometimes, you know how we normally get defensive about things and you go justify, why are you telling me what I should eat? And well, I've done that. Maybe other people haven't, but I've got got defensive at times. I'll admit. But this time, for whatever reason, I didn't get defensive, or I didn't feel the need to get defensive. I just said, I enjoy them. And he goes, but they're expensive. I said, yeah, but I enjoy them. And he went, oh. And it was that conversation, and it doesn't do it justice, but there was a massive shift in our relationship from that point on. It was no longer, it was almost as though he said, okay, I accept that you can make your own decisions for yourself. And so it wasn't over anything other. It was a packet of chips. It was like, I enjoy this packet of chips. And it was kind of like we both recognized our place now, and I was an adult to make my decision, and he saw me as being responsible enough to choose my own chips. And I was just thinking about that. Maybe that's a sort of analogy people could use in those scenarios. It's just respectfully saying, this is what I need to do for me. Like you said, you've got to put your own oxygen mask on first.
Yeah, and it's interesting. You didn't feel the need to justify having Pringles. You just said, I just enjoy that. I enjoy them, eating them. That's it. And you didn't have to come out, well, I can afford it, and because then you start probing him and challenging him and making him feel bad. And you bring judgment with all that, don't you? You're thinking you're trying to go against, but actually you're saying something positive. You're saying something personal. He can't challenge that you enjoy them because you enjoy them. You can't say, oh no, you don't. Well, no, I do. But if you say, oh, I can afford it, and then he can say, well, I don't think you can afford it, and then you can have a whole debate about why you have the cheaper ones rather than the expensive ones.
And you could take that money and invest it and look at it.
Well, exactly. But actually, I think you actually completely diffused it by saying something almost not confrontational talk. Like, yeah, just enjoy. That's it. That's a great actually way of thinking actually, rather than trying to. We always feel sometimes we have to justify things, don't we, when we do things differently?
Yeah, I've noticed that a lot. I mean, from my perspective, my history, there's a lot of times there where I had felt that I had to justify it, and it just seems not only does it create for me when I think about the times I've done that, it creates a lot of tension in your body because you feel like you're being challenged, and you got to go. Whereas I compare that to that experience with my dad, I had no tension at all in my body. Didn't feel the need to argue about it. It didn't matter what he said. I was enjoying these chips because it was right for me.
Mm.
And yeah, I just wonder, from that stress we create, because I know times where I have justified things, and I even think about, do some role playing with some friends who are barristers, and they put me in the witness box and give me a grilling sort of thing, like like I'm getting cross-examined. I don't know why I put myself up for this torture, but it's like I think it's good. But it's like you get so defensive, and well, I did, and it was an interesting experience for me to realize when someone's questioning you or asking you things that you can get quite defensive, and how to just diffuse that, and just not take
Mm.
it personally. It was a tough thing to do. It was really hard. But I just wonder if
It
that's
is, yeah, and I think for me, it's going back to when you decide to do something, whatever you want to decide to do, change, or
mm,
whether it's a work context or a family thing, is almost creating the reason why you're doing it in terms of I'm going towards something. I'm going towards having more time with my circular friends. As a positive, you almost creating a positive rather than retrenching back, justify why you're not doing something. Is
yeah,
going almost talking about where you're going towards,
yeah,
and that's always more positive. That's future, like you said. I want because I enjoy these chips,
mm,
and so I think it's that sort of bit more mindset. It's just switching it slightly rather than going, I'm not doing this because of actually don't. The reason I'm going to start doing this now,
yeah,
and just I'm going to walk this way because that's where some of my new friends are, or that's what
yeah,
my wife or my kid, whatever it is. So
mm,
going towards something, and that's far more liberating and more positive, and almost
yeah,
your demeanor will be more positive because it's going towards something rather than you're looking back to trying to get out of something.
yeah.
Um, yeah, that's just a slight little change in how we think about things.
Yeah, well, that going forward is a great idea in that as that metaphor, and I mean it's the same sort of thing. Like, why are you having that extra eggnog? Because I enjoy it. I'm moving forward to a state of drunkenness, and you can drive.
Yes.
Coming from someone who doesn't drink anymore, but or rarely, and but that's an interesting point. You're talking about because you're looking forward. You're reframing it, which you mentioned before about
Mm,
in a way of moving forward and to an outcome that's more pleasurable as well. By the sounds of it, because you can frame that way. If you're thinking back into the past,
mm.
then it becomes really difficult to reframe it because you've got I guess you've got all
Yeah.
these feelings too. Is that
Yeah, and also you get caught up in the past as well, and you feel you can't change it because you can't change the past. That's the
yeah
past, you get bogged down in emotion and stuff. And I say, if you are talking to somebody, you honor
mm,
the past. It's important
yeah.
to honor it. That's not important to say, but actually, then you then flip people to the where we're going now, and this is what I'd like to do, and the reason, not the reason to justify, but in terms
Mm.
of the path you're going on there.
I suppose it depends too. Like if we're going to say we're going to the Christmas family function and we know Uncle Bill has been a pain in the ass, and I must clarify that with my uncle as well that he had a serious accident where he was driving, or he wasn't driving, he was in the passenger seat of a car, and they were following a lorry or a truck, depending on which country you're in. The just reframing that because trying to make a little Christmas humor here. I was never a great comedian. I'll admit that. But yeah, and they were following a truck, and a brick fell off the truck and smashed through the windscreen. Actually, hit him in the head. So he was actually
Well,
supposed to have been a vegetable, but he did recover. And but he was not the same since. So and that kind of affected part of the way. So I shouldn't be harsh on him in that
no.
regard. But I was just wondering when we go to those parties and we're thinking about, okay, we're turning up to this family party where we have a set habit of behavior. And I'm just wondering how much habit plays into this as well, in that, we're expecting the person to behave that way. Then we get all tense about it, and then they behave that way, and then we justify the tension that we felt. Does that, because from your work dealing with, the stress and pressure, is that a common thing as well, that we build up this habit of expectation and then we're just fulfilling that, like a self-fulfilling prophecy?
Totally. It's called confirmation bias.
Yeah.
So you might, well, if you wake up and think, I'm going to have a rubbish day today, you stop and tell you, I'm going to have a rubbish day today.
Yeah.
Your system will look for everything to confirm what you've just set out in your intention. And so if you go to a party or a family gathering and go, oh, it's going to be rubbish because so-and-so is there, you will seek out everything that will confirm that's bias.
Yeah.
And so you will have a not very good time.
Yeah.
Sounds really obvious, and unfortunately, that's how our systems work. When we set intention, it decides to go with it. And generally, we're slightly negatively biased anyway as human beings.
What do you think causes that negative bias? Because I was wondering about that. Is that a survival thing, or because
I think it's a survival thing. Yeah, it's a survival instinct to be more on the cautious, risk-averse sort of approach. See things negatively. I'm out in the wild. That bear might get me, or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
Back to that sort of early sort of brain, sort of chimp brain type of thing.
Yeah, because I've been wondering about that. Sorry, go ahead.
No, carry on. Sorry.
Yeah, because I've been wondering about that, because I've been noticing a lot of my thoughts and really gone to a lot of effort to, when something happens, to unconsciously immediately think there's benefit in this, whatever it is, no matter what horrible experience, some of the horrible experiences that happen are gone. But it's an experience. I'm taking from William Shakespeare here, from Hamlet, where it's nothing good or bad thinking makes it so. And so I'm like, well, that's an experience. How I interpret that experience is entirely up to me. So it's not, whether it's a good or a bad. And I've had some things that most people would consider, not great. But then I've looked at it and go, well, actually, how can I use this? So not putting a label on it. I've just put, and I've tried to jump, not go, okay, this is a bad event. What can I find that's good in it? Because that presupposes that it's a bad event. So I've gone, it's an event. How can I use this to get where I want to go? And I've been able to find in everything relatively quickly that it's how it can help me move forward. But two, I found the emotion, because I wasn't labeling it as a bad event, that I don't want to say negative, but that emotion that makes us tense, and that didn't actually, it started to subside a lot to now, today, when things happen, I rarely feel tension in my body when those kind of things happen. Normally, something will happen where normally in the past I would have got really tense and stressed about it, but now it's like, oh yeah, okay, we can use this. Is that, part of, do you think, our evolution, like we're turning into the X-Men or something? I don't
know. I think we're just, what you described there is fantastic in terms of making things neutral, effectively. So no good or bad, and then then creating what can I get from this to move forward to my purpose or my next step or whatever it may be, is obviously a more positive alignment to that. I think we've just got more aware of how our brains work, and and that you've just done almost like a brain hack, really, by almost neutralizing something. And I know often people do take bad events, and then you can look for the silver lining. That's a good way of doing things, but you're actually neutralizing it, which then takes even more, the less of the emotion out. And as soon as we get emotion in there, we start to kick into our amygdala and our midbrain, which is the fight or flight part of our brain. And as soon as that starts getting raging,
the blinkers come on, and it's like
we lose all sense of clarity. We almost disconnect from our prefrontal cortex, our front brain, which is all the logic side of things. And so it's important to recognize that, and I think you've done that really well, I think, with that sort of process. But also I was going to say that, because it's interesting, thoughts, we have thoughts, positive, negative, neutral, however you want to go. those thoughts create emotions,
Yeah.
and then those emotions create behaviors, and then
Yeah.
those behaviors create actions, and that's the important step to know. Because I was talking to a client recently, and she's a like an extreme athlete, and she was looking. She's got this event in next year, and she said that she feels really scared about it.
Mm.
So she'd labelled the thought as scared, and so that
Yeah.
will create all those emotions. And I said, why don't you just think about, instead of that emotion being scared, just being excited.
Yeah.
So you just literally switched it to it, and says, "Oh yeah," and then suddenly I actually saw her body language completely change, almost
Mm.
instantly, to "Oh yeah," and she sort of sat up a bit more, and yeah, I'm excited, and she sort of, and it's just having a little hack of that, and it changed her demeanor, her approach, and suddenly she was excited about it rather than scared. Because excited means you're looking for opportunities, you're looking forward to it. There's a whole thing to come out of that. When you're
Yeah.
scared, you're looking to, how am I going to get away from this?
Yeah.
How can I stop myself doing this?
Mm.
Um, so going to your party when you've got this, it's just thinking about how you set your intention. And I talk a lot
Mm.
about this with people. And if you set your intention, like today, we're going to have whoever you're with, or you might be on your own, I'm going to have a good. You don't attach an outcome to that interaction with people.
Yeah.
That's the first thing. Because as soon as you attach an outcome to it,
So how do you
like
not do that? I mean, I haven't thought about that way. You're saying not attach an outcome. So when you're thinking about somewhere where you're going, not attaching an outcome, um,
so, for
because
example,
I'm saying
I
it from
go.
my perspective, because I'm very good at attaching out, like, this is gonna
Well, no,
be
no,
the
we,
outcome.
we all do, and I've been in sales for years, and I've did lots of outcomes. Everything I do, crumbs.
Yeah.
So say I go to a networking meeting.
Yeah.
A natural outcome could be meet people, get to connect with people, and try and win some business from it.
Yeah.
That could be a normal thing. That's what networking is sort of about.
Yep.
So when I go to a networking meeting, my intention, I put more intention more than outcome,
Mm.
is to connect with people and see how I can help people. That's it. And I
Yeah.
don't
Okay.
attach a specific outcome of I want to meet 5 people,
Yeah.
new people, and I want to have this afterwards, and da 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 da. Because if I set an intention to meet people purely to win business, or even have a
Mhm.
conversation on Zoom, people will feel this sense of he's always after my money, because his body
Mm.
language, his tone, what he says, how he says things. When I have conversations with potential clients,
Mm.
I just talk about how can I help them. I get interested in what they're doing, what their needs are, and then it just flows into, oh yeah, can you help me then? Can you? Okay, and then we just get into the conversation, and that. So I don't attach an outcome, and then so then when I come away from a networking meeting, I don't go, oh, didn't get this, didn't get that, didn't get that. Actually, I know I connected with a few people there. It's really good. Could
Yeah.
have coffee with somebody, and there's potentially some opportunities I could help people. That was it.
Yeah.
And I think when you go back to your family meal, whatever
Mm.
it is, just set your intention of, we're going to have a good time today. I'm going to look for some opportunities to be kind to people,
Yeah.
an opportunity to, and you'll start to see those things more likely because you've set your intention right for what you want to expect.
Yeah, I'm wondering from what you've said there too, when you talk about this, and like I think back to where I've had tension in family gatherings, whether too, like having that intention that this is going to be difficult or they're going to be a pain in the butt, like you say, they feel that. But yeah, so wondering how much of that is a loop that you've actually created for yourself, where you've created that they feel like you mentioned about people, oh, that they're going to want something from me. So I've gone to there expecting, Uncle Bill to be a pain in the butt, and I'm going to say, what the hell are you doing? But then he
Mm.
feels that, and sort of he reacts as well. I wonder if how much of that comes into play.
I think there is a lot of that, and also you'll just notice everything annoying about him.
Yeah.
Because you
Yep.
will, rather than
Yeah.
going, when I meet Uncle Bill today, I want to have the intention to have a good conversation about whatever he does or who he
Yeah.
is, or and your intention is different, and you'll see it different, and it's almost, before you get out the car to go in,
Yeah.
just think about that, and just briefly meditate. I'm not talking meditate for hours, just literally
Mm.
a minute or so. Just take a breath and then go right, and you'll surprise yourself, and
Yeah.
suddenly you'll start seeing things differently,
Yeah.
and it's almost changing the perspective in your brain about what you see. Because we often go into situations and you see something, and then somebody else sees something differently, and obviously it turns on the different perspective. But we can do that in our own brains as well. We
Yeah.
have a lens of, I want to see some good here, as opposed to I
Yeah.
want to see some not so good.
Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah, because different people have different experience. I remember reading um, about there was a group that went on a safari in Africa, and and they were talking about how one of the people that what happened was they got stuck. The jeep broke down. It was getting close to dark, and there was a tiger actually walking up past them. And so you had people starting to freak out, of course, that there's this tiger there. But what was in the story was there was one person there, and he just said, "Hmm, that's concerning," and just no tension. I just went, "Oh, that's concerning," and everyone's going, "Oh, it's tiger, tiger," freaking out. And I'm just wondering how we create that different experience. Like, even it's the same thing, but how do we? I mean, is it just having that intention? Like, I mean, to just wondering that as you're talking, can you just go, "Yep, I'm going to relax and enjoy and find something good about Uncle Bill"?
Yeah, if you went in with that,
Yeah,
you'll be surprised, and you'll find good, and your demeanor will be different, and you'll
yeah,
be a lot more engaging in a way you've never before, rather than trying to avoid him. Possibly, I don't know. You might actually go. You might actually seek him out and go, I want to try and find. I want to have a chat with him actually, and
yeah.
actually, you will. I mean, see how you get on, and see when you're seeing him next. When did you see him next?
This was a long time ago. We get along quite well now, so
Right.
that whole has shifted from my perspective. But it was that intention of back then. It was like, okay, he's going to be, he's going to be a pain in the butt. Now I took the attitude of, as mentioned before, just going and watching and see what happens, and I'm just going to step back and not get
Mm,
upset. Was the attitude that I took a long time ago with a lot of different things. Um,
mm,
and I was just wondering, like, from an audience perspective, I was using that as an example because I know people that still have that with, a relative,
mm.
sometimes even their partner before, where they got this, they always do that, and it really annoys me, at Christmas. But I was just wondering too, like, because you deal a lot with stress, pressure, and burnout. Is this type of year? Is there certain types of year where like burnout happens more than other types of year? Is Christmas one of those times?
I think Christmas is clearly a stressful time,
Mm,
and just what we talked about, expectations.
mm,
4 weeks into three, lots of engagements with people.
mm,
There's a financial thing that goes with it as well, depending on
yeah,
where you're at. And so, yeah, I think there's a possibly an added pressure to it.
yeah,
But burnout, which is almost prolonged sort of stress, really,
yeah,
um, is can happen anytime, and sometimes yes, Christmas could be the one that just the straw that breaks the camel's back type of thing. But actually, it can happen any time of the year. And I deal with executives who trying to avoid that they want to be successful, and get the
mm,
high performance, but they don't want the stress and the pressure and all that sort of burnout that potentially can come with it if you go about it in the wrong way, I guess.
so
But I
how
think
does
there is generally a Christmassy expectation, and again, what we have to be careful of with that is using something that's like a narrative that's
mm,
creates an expectation, and we all do this, and it's sort of why we have been to this conversation in some ways.
yeah,
But we go, oh, Christmas is always going to be stressful, isn't it?
yeah,
So suddenly you have told yourself it's going to be stressful. These
yeah,
are simple little hacks. As soon as you do that,
yeah,
you'll look for it and you'll seek it and you'll confirm that. And
mm,
I think sometimes, and I'm not saying live in la la land and go, oh, it's all going to be great and everything
yeah,
else. It's being objective about it and have some strategies and little ways of overcoming it and how you do it. But the fact that you meet people and they go, oh, we've all met those person who just goes, oh, this is terrible, isn't it? And you just feel this energy just sap out of you
yeah,
from them. And I think sometimes we can do that with Christmas and go, oh, it's going to be terrible, it's going to be this. And we
mm,
just create a narrative, and we need to change those narratives and rewrite them. And we can do that. We have the power to do that and go, okay, I'm going to see Uncle Bill. Do you know what? This year, I'm going to find out, I'm going to look and see what positive conversation get out of him. What is he interested in? What does he like doing? What gets him out? I don't know. And I'm going to have an intent of looking for some good in Uncle Bill. And suddenly you've rewritten a potential change in a narrative.
Yeah. So with that too, because like you mentioned about someone else sapping the energy out of you, I'm thinking, while you're talking about that, I was remembering someone that I dated that everything was a disaster. That was the word that was used all the time. It's such a disaster, and which I guess from the perspective of if you're around a person like that all the time, it can be very draining. But from a like a Christmas party type thing, if you're just seeing that one-off time. Is there anything you can do to put in place to go, well, if they're behaving like that, to not have that energy sapped out of you? Is that?
I mean, obviously, not seeing them is a really good thing, but that's not always possible.
Well, that's the point I'm getting. It's like you've got this one day, and it's like, okay, what can we do? Can we put our hyper shields up? Is there something we can do where it just bounces off us? Or
well, I try and I mean, I have a number of relatives I will see who will talk like everything's a disaster, and it's not really. And in some ways, because of my coach, people tend to talk a lot to me as well. I tend to end up listening a lot. That's just the nature of who I am, and that's fine.
Yeah.
And so I will listen a little bit because some people got to vent. It's okay to vent. There's nothing wrong with it. It's good to have a bit of blah.
Yeah.
And then, but what sometimes I will bring into, if someone says, keep working, use the word disaster or something, I say, come on, is it really a disaster? I say, the Titanic was a disaster. Is this a disaster? I said, is this as much as that? And I bring a little bit of humor, a little bit of comparison, and I'm almost trying to jar them a little bit, and almost play a bit of NLP on them, really. And then they go, well, I guess not. It's not really that bad, is it? And I go, and then I might turn the conversation. Well, what can you do to make it better then? And I just that's me being a coach, because I then sort of shift the conversation, and so then the conversation becomes a bit more positive. And so it depends on your relationship, depends on how you might deal with somebody. I might just bring a bit of humor to something if they keep using a word that's like, oh, this is awful, and they keep explicit and everything else, and I'm thinking, do you really? Is that awful? And then you just sort of slightly challenge them, but in a way that's not sort of judging them or anything, and then suddenly they go, oh, well, perhaps not. And I go, out of all the things you've suffered in life, on a scale of 1 to 10, where does this sit? And they go, 4 or 5. That's not that bad then, is it really? So you sort of diminished that sort of negativity in some ways. But don't spend too long time with them if you can't sort of push it onto a more positive conversation.
I like what you talk there when you're talking about it, because I wasn't always a tactful person, and maybe I'm not sometimes now too, but in the past I certainly wasn't tactful. But I like what you did there, where you were asking them a question, whereas I would, when someone had that, it's not a disaster, and I would tell them it's not, and then we'd end up in a debate about it. But what you've done is you're asking a question to help them reframe, because you're coaching. In a way, it's like, well, is it? And you're reframing it too, like you're going, okay, that compared to like the Titanic sinking, they're two totally different things. But you're doing it with a question. So is that from a person trying to? Because the approach that I've taken is nowadays is generally I'll ask them questions in the sense of to be interested in their story, but it's not my story. So I'm not taking it on. I'm not agreeing with them that it is a disaster. I'm just like, oh, I'm interested in you telling me your story, and I, just let it flow through me, and it doesn't affect me, because it's not about whether they're right or I'm right. That's their perspective. It's not my perspective, and I'm just interested in hearing your story, and then I'll move on. Whereas you're taking a more sort of a coaching approach, which I think is probably nicer to be more helpful than I am. I'm just listening to the story and moving on, but you're helping them reframe.
Well, no, and I think that's sometimes a question to ask. Sometimes if you can't get them onto a positive, this will stop them for a moment. And if they keep saying things are a disaster, and you go, well, how do you know it's a disaster?
Good question.
And they suddenly go, and they'll stop. They'll stop talking because they'll think, well, how do I know? Or they might say, oh, I keep being told at work that I'm blah, 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 and rubbish at this,
Yeah.
da, 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 da. And I go, oh, so how do you know that? And they go, well, I don't really. I don't. Or has anybody said that to you? And they go, no. Okay. And then they've realised they're making things up in their heads. So
That's
and
interesting.
they realise that as well. And I use it a lot in coaching because people
Mm.
will self-sabotage, self-talk that's just absolute garbage. We all do it. I'm not saying I don't do it. We all do it. And I just say, well, how do you know? And then that
Mm.
what that the question does, they seek then evidence for that,
Yeah.
and they go and they can't find it. They realise there isn't any evidence for it.
Yeah. Okay, that's pretty profound, actually. How do you know? Um, Putting that into that frame. So really, I mean, from that perspective, if we're going into those situations around, well, the party type of thing that we're talking about is going in with that positive expectation, and
Mm.
just an expectation that, rather than expecting it to be traumatic, looking for the opportunity within there, and like you're saying, being able to have that tool if someone is, being a downer. How do you know that is this case, or if
Yeah,
referring it that way? Yeah.
definitely.
What about from I mean, like, other pressure that we have? Because obviously leading up to Christmas is the financial side of things as well. I know there's a number of places people look forward to a Christmas bonus. They don't always get it. How do we reframe? And I look at it from my perspective. It wasn't a pressure because I could afford to do it, but I had this thing about, I had to have a Christmas tree that had lots and lots of presents under it. And I was terrible. Well, I enjoyed doing it. I liked having this big thing, especially, and maybe I was overcompensating as a single dad, wanting to have, this really cool tree. And like most kids, they play more with the boxes than the toys. And but now it's kind of, for me, it's been a shift in taking that, so it wasn't really a financial pressure, but it was stuff that was bought that really probably didn't need to be bought because it was never really used that much. And now this Christmas coming up, because I don't have to deal with Santa, and it was, sorry kids, if you're under 14, you shouldn't be listening to this anyway. We don't want to destroy. Already talked about Santa beating people up earlier today. About the,
Yes.
um, But from that perspective, I mean, to this Christmas, I mean, I talked to my son about what he wanted for Christmas, and he had some AirPods that he lost, and now he's been using cable ones ever since. And I said, "What do you want for Christmas?" And he goes, "I just want some AirPods." I went, "Okay, yeah, I can do that," and that's it. And I was thinking, should I buy him a whole bunch of other stuff? But then I'm thinking, well, last year I bought you this big Lego Star Destroyer, which has sat in your room, with, I think, the first couple of bits built and just sat there ever since.
He hasn't got your passion for Lego, then, has
No, not certainly not. No, and I'm tempted to build it, but I was like, I'm just wondering how much there we can reframe it ourselves as well, and just and take that pressure off, because I know. Said I could afford to do. I kept it within budget, but we don't always. And sometimes we feel this pressure to want to do all these things, but it's really not what the other person wants, which is where I'm getting to with that story. I wanted to do, give all these things and
he?
create this wonderful Christmas for my son with all these presents and stuff like that. And yeah, he got really excited unwrapping them. But then after that, he was back to doing what he enjoyed doing. And
Mm.
I'm just wondering how we can reframe and take that pressure out of our Christmas.
Yeah, and it's tricky depending on. I mean, if your kids are older, like yours and mine, you can have those sort of grown-up conversations of
Mm,
what do you want, and being quite open, honest. And I know it's difficult sometimes to
yeah.
say, this is the sort of what I'm budgeting, and it goes back to that,
Mm,
simple budgeting. And for Christmas, I'm budgeting X,
yeah.
$100 or pounds, whatever it is, and using that as your guide, which I think is the first thing to start with anyway, to know what can you spend,
Mm,
because it is a slippery slope, particularly when you start having friends who start buying you presents as adults, which I find really strange. And you're thinking, I wasn't expecting that, and then suddenly you feel this obligation to go back, and everything else
Yes.
goes on. And
I love the
I think
scene out of.
watching.
So I was going to say, I love the scene
Sure.
out of where was it? What's that show with the Big Bang Theory, where someone buys Sheldon a gift and then he's got to work out exactly what it costs because he's got to get exactly the right amount of value back to the other person.
Yeah, I mean, we've got some friends. We all, as adult friends, there's only another family we do buy, and that's just become a thing. And I don't mind that; it's quite nice. But
Yeah,
it's actually, I think I'm going to something tonight that somebody's saying they're getting some presents. I'm thinking, well, I'm not. I'm deciding that wasn't in the script. That wasn't in the, if you want to give me a present, that's fine. I'll appreciate
yeah,
that, but I don't want to feel I've got to come back with a. Do you know what I mean? If you decided that, that's you. That's great.
yeah.
But no, I think set your budget at the first point, so you know what you've got,
Mm,
and then if it's depending on your kids, if they're older, then have those conversations. And again, and if the younger kids, frankly, just use the budget. As you say, they're not going to know whether they've got a lot or not, particularly when they're
yeah,
really young. And yes, you can almost, if you want to create loads of boxes and
mm,
lots of presents, just wrap everything in
yeah.
boxes. Um, and it is a huge pressure, and it's going back to what is the point of Christmas? What is this all about? And we get
Yeah,
caught up in the commerciality of it all. Is what am I trying to achieve at this? And I do this with my clients in terms of what would you like to have happen? And it's almost like
mm,
ask yourself this question: what would you like to have happen at Christmas? Well, I'd like to have some good time. You almost have that as a plan: good time with my family. I like to give some gifts because I think it's quite a nice thing to do within a budget, and just set yourself almost mini goals
yeah.
as what you would like to achieve, and then think, okay, these are my goals over Christmas. I want to spend. I want to
Mm.
see certain family. I want to do this on Christmas Day, whatever it is, and just almost 5 or 6 goals over Christmas. And so I want to spend £500, blah blah blah, whatever it is.
That's really important. What you're saying there is setting the goals and probably the intention behind that as well. I mean, as a
Yeah.
family, is that something that you do together? Because I was having that conversation with some other people before as well, and like I know some friends of mine as a family, and they've got one particular family. They're quite have a large family. Like the husband and wife, they've got 7 children, and I think there's 13 grandchildren, and they've got a family business that they've had for a long time. The son has now taken over that business, and the dad's retired. But they have like a board meeting I think it's every second year, where they plan out this is what we're going to do as a family. And I'm just wondering whether that's from your perspective, do you look at that your family? Because from mine, it's something that I've started to think about. Well, with Benjamin being he's 14 now, it's like, well, maybe we should start planning this out our year together and having that conversation. It'd be good for him. I mean, I've talked about goal setting, but then to actually have goal setting with someone. I'm wondering if there's a strategy that people could do for Christmas and plan that out as a family to help reduce the stress as well.
I think that's a fantastic idea. I mean, and do it back in the summer.
Yeah.
Do it way before the emotions and all the things start
For
kicking
those in
on.
the southern hemisphere in the winter.
I Yeah, sorry, yes, I forget who I'm talking to here. Yes, yes,
We're talking
exactly.
to the world, and then when
July time,
yeah,
July time. Yes,
but the people on the equator who don't have any seasons other than wet and dry, well, not even dry, just wet and not so wet.
yes. Sorry, yes, yes. So I think it's and it depends on if it's a wider family, almost the expectations of who we're going to see, how it all plays out, and
Mm,
people get into that sort of, when the kids get to a certain adult age, we don't get into presents because then it starts getting a bit ridiculous.
yeah.
Um, and so, I think I know I don't do it on a wider family. We've almost got to a place now where when kids become adults, it's like a sort of say it's almost by stealth, unwritten rule.
Yeah.
We don't buy presents for them.
Yeah.
And so we just, and well, my wife's sister she's a real gift type person. This is her love language. And
Mm,
so always buys gifts, and we almost have to sort of replicate that. But we just keep it quite modest. You know, we don't go. They might spend 30, 40 pounds on those, but we won't go that far. So we just keep to our budget. We don't do a tit for tat sort of value. I
Yeah.
don't think that's expected anyway.
Mm.
But my wife and I, we will plan a. We do, Chris. We plan out in my summertime in terms of booking cottage.
Yeah.
You know what we're doing for New Year. We're away for New Year as well with some friends. We did it last year. So 4 or 5 friends who I'm seeing tonight for our Advent curry. And we will plan and think about how much we're going to spend, who we're going to see. And so we set a little plan. And because my girls, my eldest is in Canada, and I've got 3 other as well. So, and actually my girls are actually, they're going to Canada for Christmas with their family. So with their mum. So I'm not seeing them at Christmas. So I'm seeing them the week before, again, reframe that, and then I'm seeing them for New Year and all that sort of stuff. So that's all been planned way out before we've even hit this period. So I'm just now ready to lap up and just enjoy the next sort of few weeks. So I think, yes, going back to sit down if you can, but do it outside of the Christmas, and just on the goal setting side of things. I've done it recently, but for years on New Year's Day, I used to always have my girls on New Year's Day. So we used to sit down with them, and even when my youngest was like 4 or 5, we do a goal setting session together.
Love that.
Which is just, it sounds that's really a bit serious for a 4-year-old up to a 12-year-old. But actually,
how do you set that habit?
We just, and we did literally 3 or 4 things they talk about. I'd share what I was going to do. I'm going to do a marathon or various things, those sort of things. And even my eldest now still does it.
Yeah.
And she says, "Dad, these are my goals," and she sent them over to me, on email. And so we've kept them all as well. And so you can see all what they want to do. Do a gap year, go traveling, or whatever it was doing that year. And it's instilled in them something in a positive way. It's good to set goals, good to have an intention and a plan to go for. And we did that always the New Year. So that's been really helpful for them.
I think that's really important what you're doing there, because I've always been, well, not always, but lately been of the belief, and that's part of, you mentioned about, I mentioned about the, the Shakespeare and nothing's good or bad. You treat an event as neutral, and that's part of the book that I'm writing at the moment. But also to having that, like you're talking about, you're creating this habit and this plan and this intention of what you're expecting. Because to me, I've always found that life itself, the principles in life are fairly simple. Like, if you want to have money, you keep a surplus from what you earn, you invest that, and then reinvest the income. I mean, I'm taking that from Richest Man in Babylon. It's not an overly complicated formula to have money. We just don't do it. And similar sort of thing, what you're talking about there is you set up with your daughters at a young age a habit of, planning out for a future. Because most people, and I was very guilty of this for most of my life, was I'd spend more time planning a holiday than I would spend planning my life. And that's quite common. But what you were teaching your daughter from a young age was this habit of regularly planning out what she's going to do. And from what I can tell from the reading that I've done, is the people that succeed on whatever level you consider success, they've always had a plan. They've always had this goal. And you mentioned about working, going towards something. I mean, a goal gives you that ability to go towards. So I think that's what you're talking about. There's really, really profound if we can make that a habit. And I'm just wondering too, like we when we're setting goals, I hadn't thought about it until you mentioned that, but setting that intention, not just the what you want to achieve, in the sense of the physical thing, like you want to, but you mentioned before about how you can help someone when you go, going to a networking event. And I'm just wondering if we, set that intention for the year of like, how can I be kind to people, or how can I help people throughout the year, how that might change the way, we approach the year going forward, and reduce the stress of the Christmas. Like, well, let's bring it back to Christmas, which is what we're talking about, is like we have the intention of, I'm going to make, my intention is to enjoy or learn something from people, even if previously they've aggravated the crap out of me. And make that an intention. And as a family, support each other on that. I mean,
Well, just even on that intention, I would just forget the aggravated the crap out of you. Just
yeah,
do the intention of enjoy and learn, and that's
yeah,
it. Keep it the intention, because what the intention does, it's not specific like a goal in a
yeah,
sense, and that's okay. It's almost the how piece of it. Like it's like that sort of
yeah,
how. And just going back to another intention I set many years ago, and this is not without any understanding of this, because I didn't understand why I did it, and when I reflect on it now, I think that was interesting. I didn't have a great dad. In
mm,
fact, my dad was rubbish basically. He died when my firstborn was born. He died 2 days before my firstborn,
yeah,
and the much of the relationship I had is that I got more excited the fact that I would get 2 weeks leave from my work because of my dad dying, for my daughter off. So that's how
wow,
I viewed it. I reframed it, and that's how my relationship was rubbish. So,
yeah,
but it's interestingly, often when you have a bad upbringing, and this can be, again, going back to people get triggered at Christmas from various
mm,
upbringings. And instead of me going, I don't want to be a rubbish dad like my dad,
yeah,
which is a negative, and it's a historical statement.
yeah,
What I did when my firstborn was born, and I wasn't a coach then, I didn't know
mm,
about these things.
yeah,
I weirdly made this intention that I wanted to be the best dad I could be to my daughter. That's what
yeah,
I did. I set out, whatever that is. I didn't know what it meant,
yeah,
and so I've always had that going towards something more positive. And I would say I'm a pretty good dad. I got a good relationship with my girls, and really enjoy them. They enjoy me, and I'm annoying at times, clearly, as I'm a dad. But and I would
good
say,
job.
you know, sort of that's my intention, and I've always had that throughout my life. Is every opportunity, how can I be the best dad in this situation? Which then helps me with how do I manage Christmas? How do I mention tensions with ex-wife? All those things. It
Mm,
becomes a bit of almost like a guiding light, really. And I think it's when you've been triggered by Christmases of old,
mm.
you know, instead of focusing on I don't want to be like that last Christmas, well, you're almost going back again and talking about last Christmas. Actually, what would you like it to be like? So it's just shifting it again.
So is that like, because like the law of attraction, where you know from NLP as well, like I can't say to you, don't think of a pink elephant without you actually having to think of that to then, because you've got to reference it to know what to not think about. So
Yeah,
by saying don't, your unconscious mind doesn't know don't. So as soon as you think of it, that's what you're thinking of, regardless of whether
yeah,
you put don't in front of it or not. So what you're talking about is focusing on where you're going as opposed to the things that you don't want. It's like a
yeah.
smoker saying, instead of saying, I don't want to be a smoker, it's like I want to be healthy.
Yes, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And it's that reframe on the positive intention. And
Mm.
I feel like I'm repeating myself, but that's how it is in terms of seeing more, getting things more positive about things, or seeing things in a better perspective, is go for the future rather than go back.
I'm interested in, like, when you said about your dad and your relationship with your dad and that experience there, and then you move forward from that. Because I mean, I'm thinking about it from my perspective as well. I mean, I was lucky in the sense of my parents. I think their intention was very loving. There's some things that they did that weren't, and there was some trauma from my childhood that took a lot to deal with. But I now that I'm thinking about it, I'm not sure how I dealt with that. And I'm just wondering from your perspective, and you know, for people that are in that situation, how did you reframe that to not be a negative? Like, you've still got the memories of your dad. I mean, they're never going to go away. But how do you take that and not have that impact on your behaviors going forward?
I suppose I do think about aspects of my dad that were really positive.
Yeah,
Because it wasn't all bad. I mean, if I say,
yeah,
"Oh, it was terrible,"
yeah,
and then actually it wasn't, we do those sweeping statements, don't we?
yes,
It's all rubbish. Well, actually, it's not all rubbish.
yes.
So
Yeah. How do you know it was
and
wrong rubbish? Yes,
exactly. And it's like actually it was overarchingly not very good, and
yeah,
that's my experience. And it's an interesting talking to my brother who had a different experience,
Mm.
and he was surprised at my experience and what I said, actually, which is interesting.
Yeah.
But I then, instead of just focusing on all the massive negative, I go, well, okay, my dad was really good at mental arithmetic, and he used to always ask me, Julian, what's 10 times 11? Da, 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 da.
Mm.
I'm really good at the mental arithmetic. I've
Yeah.
got that sort of brain, and he enabled me to do that.
Mm.
Because of my dad, because of gambling, drinking, and other stuff, we moved house a lot because we had to pay off debt. And
Right. Yeah.
so I moved. I think I worked it out as 14 times up to the age of 16.
Yeah.
So
Mm.
instead of seeing that as the negative, well, actually, it makes me very adaptable. I'm very good in new situations.
Yeah.
I'm quite agile, and so I've started to look for because there's always some positive,
Mm.
and it's not just being. I'm not just willing positive thinking. I'm actually going. Actually, there was some good stuff there,
Yeah.
and so that's what I've done to sort of take, rather than seeing it all as bad and
Yeah.
focusing on the bad. Actually, there's some good stuff there, and then build upon that for my future.
That's interesting you mentioned that because as you're saying that, alarm bells are going off in my head when I think about that. Like, well, one of my experiences was, and people are probably going to laugh. It's not that bad, and it's not. But like, I had to, when I joined the army, I could make my bed army style and have my gear organized because from growing up, everything had to be exactly in the right. My mum, the
Mm,
socks had to be. I had to fold my own socks. They had to be exactly in the right, folded exactly correctly and stored in the right spot. Underwear folded correctly in the right spot. Everything had to be there. In the morning, I'd have to get up, make my bed, and my bed had to be made, at 45 degrees. The sheet was folded that way. That was how, I grew up. And I said, I know, some kids, experience way, abuse and all that kind of stuff, and that's much, much, obviously very, traumatic and that kind of thing. But when I'm relaying that story, because when I'm thinking about that, well, yeah, certainly when I got to the army, I could fold my sheets really well. It's
mm,
certainly, I think from the perspective of, as much of my first marriage didn't work, but I was able to help out around the house quite well with the washing and all those kind of household things
mm,
that I think guys generally don't do.
mm,
I'm being big generalization there. I know there's a lot of guys that do that, so apologies for you guys. But guys are generally not known for, regularly doing the washing, that kind of thing. But that
mm,
was something that, was instilled in that. And, now you've said that, those alarm bells going off, going, well, actually, there was some stuff there that wasn't great. And without getting into all the other things, it's like, well, this is all useful and being able to be used.
mm.
Yeah.
Well, totally, and that, there's a fact, isn't it? They say making your bed every day before you get off
Yeah.
out to work is, and I always taught our children to make their bed before they get up, or once
Mm.
they get up, I should say. There's something about making your bed every day, and there's some sort of army thing, which obviously, getting discipline, order, you're in
Mm.
the right frame of mind, you've left something very tidy, and
Yeah.
there's some real positives, as much as it was probably at the time felt
Yes.
horrendous. But actually, it served you well
Mm.
for the future, and I think it's, you know, life is, it's all about experiences, and I think we'll go back to the early comment you made about it's how we respond to those, isn't it, and how we take them, and we can take them and cause them to be negative. And I'm not talking people who've had abuse and
Yeah.
need therapy, and there's obviously that as well, but generally, it's how we respond to something, and we're in control of that response. And whether we take something and turn it into something that will be a slave to, and it will stop us growing, or we use it as an opportunity to learn and use it as a stepping stone for something new, is in our gift, really. And I think that's what we need to endeavor to do. It's not always easy, and that's
Yeah.
why we do need people around us, friends, coaches, advisors,
Mm.
just to sort of help with that journey. And I think, as much as what I've learned over time is you need a network of support in various guises. And my wife and I, we foster a child, actually, she's 14 years old now, so I've got
Yeah.
three birth children, and so seeing her life, and not that I compare, because it's not about comparing, but I
Mm.
often think, well, my family life wasn't as bad as what she's experienced, in
Yeah.
terms of sort of neglect up to the age of 8 and all that sort of stuff.
Mm.
And so, that's not a negative sort of comparison in that sense, but it sometimes helps that context. But even she's starting to see things differently, and we're trying to be positive about what she's grown up with her dad, who's obsessed by airplanes, and I said, oh, that's really good, obsessed by trains, and actually,
Mm.
why don't we turn it into something good? Actually, you'd be really good working in a network center in trains, trying to manage where all the trains are. And
Yeah.
so it's taking something that potentially might have been a negative connotation to it, to make
Mm.
it a little bit more, actually, you can use that in a positive way. And so
Yeah.
again, it's trying to reframe things. And, it's not always easy, because life can be tough, and, emotions and everything else are riding high in certain situations, which goes back to getting back into, being back in the moment, in life. Those emotions come out of, usually out of lack of control, or stress, or thinking back into being depressed about the past. Get back into the moment, and use those mindful techniques to do it. I do cold water swimming, that really helps
Yeah.
me. So yeah.
It sounds like too what you're talking about there with your foster child as well. There's part of that that links to gratitude. Because when you were talking about that, I was thinking about, when I look at my situation, and there's some times where things haven't gone well. I've been fortunate where things have gone
Mm,
really well as well. But when I compare that to my grandparents, like my dad's parents, when they first came out here, they came as war refugees from after World War II. There
mm,
was a repatriation camp, which was at Bonegilla, which is up, about an hour and a half north of Melbourne. The work that my grandfather was able to find when he got here was at the other side of Melbourne, 6 hours away. And then back then we really don't appreciate the technology that we have now. Like, because back then, even phone calls were difficult. So
mm,
my grandfather and grandmother, and my grandfather could have travelled every weekend on the train to see the family, but if he did that, he'd spend pretty much most of the money that he'd earn, because it's not like cheap travel today. It was quite expensive, especially
mm,
compared to, he didn't speak English, so he was only working as a labourer, so he wasn't earning much. So he spent, separated from not only my grandmother but my dad and his sister for 6 weeks at a time, working, saving the money until he could buy a block of land. And then
mm,
he used his weekends to build a two room, not two bedroom, two-room house with a dirt floor and a wood stove. And that's when my grandmother and my dad and auntie moved down. And they were separated for, I think it was over a year. I think it was it wasn't a year and a half. I think it was 14 to 15 months. They
mm,
were separated from that perspective, seeing each other every 6 weeks, um, uh, communicating by letter in between, which again took a week turnaround, or week to get there, and then a week coming back. So
mm,
when I think about my life and when things aren't going quite well, I kind of reminded of what they're doing, and then I go, well, maybe I've got a lot of things to be grateful for, because my
mm,
situation is not. I'm just wondering, like, from our perspective, when we look at this type of season as well, how much we can stop and take a breath and go, hang on a minute, what we've got going here. Actually, Uncle Bill, back in the day when I was having those issues, I've got an Uncle Bill. He got hit in the head with a brick. He could be
mm.
not with us anymore.
Yeah,
And just having that great.
exactly.
Yeah.
No, no, no. And there's a number of things, isn't it? It's sort of yeah, just sort of being grateful, but also just talked about like volunteering. I think sometimes when you serve other people, when you
Mm,
like get involved in charity and stuff,
yeah.
it really enables you and helps you, because you become more empathetic, and I think it also takes these doing things with other people takes it away from your own situation, and
Mm,
and also gives that sort of gratefulness of your own situation. Not that you do it for that, but actually by doing it, you serving other people. By serving other people, there's something quite amazing at what happens in your sort of psyche with that. But going back to the gratitude piece, and looking, there's known studies that gratitude releases those neurotransmitters of dopamine, serotonin, which
mm,
are your good feel emotions. Basically, they create that good feel. They create a positive mindset. So even if you start the day by saying a few things you're grateful for, genuinely grateful for, it will elicit a positive mindset, and then
Yeah.
from that you can build upon that positive intention as well. So actually can really help you. So actually, as you say, you just saying and being grateful. Actually, I've got Uncle Bill, because actually he could have been killed.
Yeah.
That thing, actually, that, and then suddenly you start thinking about, oh, it'd be good to see him today and to catch up with him, and suddenly your whole demeanor will change and you'll be in a much
Yeah.
better place. Not saying everything's all going to go swimmingly, but it will be in a more likely to be a better engagement with that person, I'm sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So so with that, because from my perspective, I mean, it wasn't something I consciously thought about, but I was, like you mentioned before, when your daughter was born, you had to set this intention without realizing what intentions were at that time, if I understood you correctly. And
Mm.
similar sort of thing with gratitude from my perspective, because without knowing what gratitude was and the effect it was, there was times where I made myself feel really upset because I was constantly thinking about, why isn't it fair and things like that. But there's a lot of times in my life where, even before I became aware of the effect of gratitude, where I could have got upset, but I went, oh, I'm pretty lucky in other ways. And that was kind of the quote that I'd say to myself when something didn't go right. I was like, oh, I'm pretty lucky in other ways. Was the most way of doing it. But then now I've trained myself at an unconscious level, I think, where gratitude is just because I walk around daily just feeling grateful to be alive and to enjoy. When it's raining, it's like, oh, isn't it wonderful that it's raining? I get to experience that. And that's become an unconscious action, I think, partly because it became a habit. And when you practice a habit, that sinks into your unconscious mind. To creating, from your perspective, is that something, do you have techniques of creating gratitude?
No, I mean, it's like all things, in creating habits is
Mm,
effectively you're creating neural pathways,
yeah.
and you have to, it's like, walking on a piece of grass.
Mm,
You keep walking on the same bits,
yeah.
eventually you'll create a path.
Yeah.
Same principle with the habits. And so, they say there's some, I don't know, sort of data or studies that it takes, I can't remember the exact, a certain number of days to create a habit that will
Yeah,
stick.
it's 28 or something like
Uh,
that is what I've read. 28
yeah,
repetitions. They say 28 days because people do it, once a day. But if you do it a lot,
yeah. So I think so. It's trying to, but I think for me, the best way with habit development is, rather than doing it standalone and on its in isolation and trying to create a new habit, it's
mm,
almost like walking across a path and walking across the grass to try and build this. It can take a lot of hard work and not very inspiring at times.
yeah,
Is to start a habit on a current habit you do.
okay, yes,
So for example, I don't know, every day you wake up at whatever 6 in the morning and you always have a coffee.
yeah,
Yeah, that's a habit. You do not get out of bed and the next thing you do is you put the kettle on and you make a coffee. That is
yeah,
a habit that you
yes,
probably make thousands of times.
yeah.
And that, well, drinking coffee, that's a good habit, I would say. All
And
right,
being
I said
grumpy
okay.
until you get that coffee, that's a habit too.
Yeah. So and it's depending how much caffeine you have and all that. I don't drink caffeine. I still have a coffee. I like the coffee taste, and weirdly, it still gives me that
Yeah.
little. And there's no caffeine in it. It's weird, I know. So that's a good habit, I'd
Your
say.
mind works like
That's,
that, doesn't it? It creates chemicals, and I mean, it's referred to as a placebo effect. But if you
yeah.
believe it's true, it has that effect, doesn't it?
I mean, I don't believe I've got caffeine in it. I don't. It just.
No.
I think it's just. I've had caffeine for so much, and it might just be the fact that I have it in the morning at that time, and
Yeah.
then it just. Who knows? And I just love a cup of coffee in the morning, and
Yeah.
even though I'm not going to get any caffeine, but yeah, you create. So you get up, you have a coffee at 6 o'clock. It's what you do every day. All you do is build a new habit. I say, okay, what I'm going to do at that time,
Mm.
I'm going to do some gratitude. I'm going to think of 3 things I am grateful for,
Yeah.
and that could be on a
Okay.
big scale, or it could be from the yesterday or whatever. It could be I'm grateful that I've got money in the bank. I'm grateful that I've
Yeah.
just won a new whatever it is. And a good way to really embed that is
Mm.
then to literally write those things down as a journal.
Yeah.
So, so write the 2 or 3 things that you're grateful for and just think about that. And then suddenly and then so every time you wake up for coffee,
Mm.
you do that. If you do that for 28 days, then that'll be the thing you do. Wake up for coffee, and then you'll get your pen, your journal, and you'll do your gratefulness. And that's the way you build a habit, and is build on current habits that you currently do.
Yeah. And is that like to remind yourself? You put a post-it note on the kettle to say, 3 things you're
You
grateful
could do
for,
that. Yeah.
and then
Do gratitude, and then it'll become. And get your wherever you sit, put the book there ready with a pen to do the journaling, and you'll just it'll just become part. You're linking a habit with a habit basically, and then
yeah,
that's what you're doing, and so that it becomes, and then you'll be triggering. So you have your coffee, and I'll do my gratitude next.
yeah.
That becomes your thing.
Is it too, like, because I was reading about how video games are created, and Mario Brothers in particular was created in a way where you had all these little rewards as well. So is that part of this process where you reward yourself for, like, you've done your gratitude journal, give yourself a pat on the back, make yourself feel good, because then you want to do it again? Because that's how I've read that video games were created, in a way that they're slightly addictive. That you've got these little milestones that you've got. There's small little challenges that you've got to get, and you get over it, you get a sense of satisfaction. Then there's the next one, and then there's the next one, and there's the next one, to keep you moving forward. Can we build that in as well?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, when you're doing gratitude anyway, you'll get a dopamine hit anyway with that,
True.
and so yes,
Yeah.
but yes, there's a sense of, and that goes back to another thing to do is to, and you could do this in an evening, and
Yeah.
as opposed to the morning, is then celebrate success. So you could go, yay, I've done 10 days of gratitude journaling or whatever you did, or then, celebrate, I, won a new client, or celebrate, I had a really good conversation with Uncle Bill today, or whatever it is. It's
He's going to
embedding.
listen to this, I'm sure now. He's like,
but it's then almost you're topping and tailing. Then you got the gratitude to start your day, and then you're celebrating at the end. So then you're almost creating that sort of bookends of positive sort of sense of approach, and thinking things about in a good way.
Yeah, well, that's interesting you mentioned that, because that's something now for me that happens automatically, because I made that a conscious choice, and I think I built it in as a obviously built it in as a habit. But, like, at the end of the day, if I'm feeling like I've had a crap day, or I shouldn't even say if I'm feeling like, if it's starting to feel like I'm having a crap day, it immediately shifts to going, oh, what did you accomplish? And that's a shift in my mind, and all of a sudden I go, well, you did this and you did that and you did this, so it becomes a focus, not what I didn't do, but what I actually did do. And I think that was something I had to do, because and that's coming back to parents and that kind of thing, because I'd start a number of things and not finish a lot, and my dad would say to me, oh, you don't finish all this stuff, and that became a way of thinking that I'm not finishing things, and that was a bad thing. And then from my mental shift, it became, okay, actually, I've started a lot, but I've also finished a lot. There's a lot I didn't finish, but there's a lot of things I actually did finish. Out of that list of 300 that I had to do today, I did 30. So that's a good way of for me, it was a good way of making that shift and overcoming that parental negative feeling about myself. So that was one of my growth experiences, where I actually made that shift to go, okay, well, it wasn't gratitude, but it was more about going, well, I'm actually achieving quite a lot, and so that became rewarding the successes. I think that may be where that linked to later in life.
But obviously, you're doing a conscious shift there, isn't it? You're consciously shifting from think about the negative, which is our natural bias, is negative, to consciously going, actually, I'm going to do the positive. What did I achieve? And I think, as you say, the rewards bit is if I focus more on the positive, not that there's nothing wrong with looking at things that go wrong, because that's how you learn anyway.
Yeah.
But it's looking at the creating that, I guess, filter or lens that will see opportunities and see ways out of something that can be quite difficult as well. Rather than just focusing on the problem, you don't get anywhere just looking at a problem because you're just stuck. If there's a boulder in the way and you just look at the boulder, it's not going to move. It's still going to be there.
Yeah.
You need to step back and start looking at other ideas and how far we come, what ways can we get around this, what are the opportunities here, and that makes your thinking differently. And so by being more grateful, celebrating success, will start to set your I guess who you are to see opportunities and potentially be able to navigate things, be able to be more resilient and more
Mm.
agile because you can see more opportunities.
Yeah, that's interesting to seeing those opportunities, and you could use that as a long-term plan for Christmas success. It's like, okay, this year, at the end when you leave the party going, I did this thing really good, and give yourself that dopamine rush. And then
Yeah.
next year, it's like I did the extra thing, and or maybe you get together at Easter, so you've actually got a double hit throughout the year of the festive dopamine. I wanted to also, you mentioned, I just made a note when you were talking, is serving other people. Because that, when you said that, that reminded me, there was a time after I left the army, I was in Perth, and I didn't really have much in the way of employment at that time. But there was, I remember one specific Christmas, there was a foundation, I'm not sure how I got involved with them, but a charity, and they organized this massive Christmas um, dinner in a park. They had this huge tent, and it was for homeless people, or people that weren't so well off. And I'd actually volunteered. I can't remember how it had come about, but I know I had volunteered to help, and I was helping out with that. And I remember, in particular, there was something missing, and one of the organizers for it, that had to go and get something, and he just turned to me. He threw me his car keys, like, and he never knew me. We'd never met before. I'd turned up to volunteer and help on that day. So this complete stranger has given me the car keys to what turned out to be this. I can't remember what it was, but it was a really nice car. So he's just thrown me his car keys, said, "Go and get this. It's at this place, and bring it back." And I remember just this whole thing of. Um, I remember it fondly in the sense of it just was a good experience, and I'm just wondering how much of that too we can add into our Christmas to deal with the stress, rather than thinking about it all as stressful, is going, well, what can I do? Like you mentioned before about the network, how can I help people? But from the Christmas perspective, rather than thinking about it, or how am I going to deal with this? But well, how can I help people? Having that intention.
Yeah, it takes it takes the focus away from you in that sense of your own particular stress or your own particular Christmas. And
Mm,
I think by volunteering at various organisations at Christmas, and there's a huge need for it. And obviously you can do it all year round. It's not just a Christmas thing.
yeah,
Um, does something in terms of, I think it creates this also sense of meaning in your life,
yeah,
and a sense of purpose. I'm doing something quite meaningful here. I'm contributing.
yeah,
I'm making a difference, which is all really, really positive stuff.
mm,
Um, it takes my attention away from my own perhaps needs or wants, but also perhaps makes mine a little bit pathetic. Sometimes we sometimes realise
yeah. First world
I've
problems.
been I've been worrying about this and think, my goodness, not that we do it for that sake, but that's what happens as well. And I think just creating that sense of empathy, compassion, and sort of kindness really keeps that sort of positive mindset. And I think we're all innately got something in us to help others in some shape or form, and I think it's a positive thing. And I think if you tap into that, I think it'll distract you from the sort of small problems that you really have, to be honest,
Yeah,
and keeps you grounded, keeps you in the right perspective and the right heart, I think. So I always encourage people to do, if you can do. I'm a trustee of an organisation called Food Bank
yeah,
that serves many people in sort of poverty, food poverty, and so we have volunteers for that and stuff like that. So definitely do something that you feel you're contributing, be more meaningful, because
mm.
life's not just about earning money and your own needs as such.
Yeah, I found that like when I look around, and certainly from my perspective, I'm always looking for ways to help out and help other people, and giving, I'm quite comfortable giving my time to do that, to help other people. And I know from my perspective, I feel really good because of that, no matter what my day's like. Well, my day's always pretty good because of wanting to help
Mm,
people. But I've also noticed, paid attention to people that seem to be, I've been fortunate that have a lot of friends that, are quite well off, and it was interesting for me because I didn't come up from that background. I actually came up, obviously mentioned before, as my grandparents came here with practically nothing, just a suitcase, and that was it.
mm,
In growing up, my parents weren't, well off or anything like that. I mean, we're okay, but we weren't, well off. Um, and there was kind of a negative uh, feeling towards people that did have money. But then later in life, I said I got to associate with a lot of people that were quite well off, and it was interesting, um, that it seemed to me that they were always very giving of their time, which was their time was quite valuable, but they were always I
mm,
know from my perspective, there was a number of people where when I needed or wanted to have a chat with them, I'd say, "Look, I've got a few questions to ask you. Do you mind if I buy you coffee?" And these weren't, friends at that time. They were just, kind of people that I'd brushed past. But I
mm,
called up and ended up, had to speak to the secretary and said, "Look, do you mind if booking a time, then I'll buy them coffee. I just had a few questions and things like that." And they always made time to have a chat. And at the end of the day, they
mm,
paid for the coffee too, which was, it was kind of cool. But it was just, to me, I always found it fascinating that they made that time, and were always giving of their time, not just, for me, but in society as well. And I wondered, and it got me to really thinking about, maybe, we think, oh, if we have this, then we'll give, but it's actually the other way around. That actually,
mm,
when we give and help others, it's because in life we it's really hard to succeed by yourself, no matter what it is you're trying to succeed in,
mm,
whether it's, business or relationships or whatever. Well, certainly relationships, you need someone else to relate to. Um,
mm,
but and this is where I was wondering, if how do we make that conscious shift to realizing that actually it's not having the stuff is then we get to it. It's actually giving first, and then that's when you receive, because that's the order it goes in. You plant the seed and get the oak tree, that kind of thing. Wondering how we realize that where for people.
yeah, it's true. Yeah, you give before you get, in a sense, which is
Mm,
interesting, isn't it? And it feels risky because you're like, oh, I'm giving before I get anything, and
yeah.
you don't give to get. It's not that sort of mindset. No, it's not
Mm,
like a slot machine.
yeah.
Um, I think for me, and I do a lot of this stuff with clients. It goes back down to getting this clarity on your purpose, because if we get caught up in how much money you want to earn and da da da, it's just, life is quite futile, really, to be honest. If
Mm,
you think about that, I'm
yeah.
not saying money is not important and we need money and that, all that sort of stuff,
Mm,
clearly. But I had a client recently where, you know, very successful, but they've come to their purpose of, what's their purpose? I think it's making an impact at scale. That was their sort of purpose statement.
yeah.
There's more to it than that, but it got them thinking, what does that mean?
Mm,
How do I make an impact? And that's not just in his business world, but in his family, in his community. It crosses all things, and it suddenly creates something. He wants to do it at scale, so that I get this business, I can then help provide for my family as for generations to come, and I can get involved in this community stuff and this and that, whatever it is. And so getting the clarity on that purpose, which usually is more meaningful,
mm,
and it's bigger than you. It's not
yeah.
just what am I going to get. It's not goals. It's not that. It's bigger than that, and it's something you almost don't really achieve. It's something you go towards.
Yeah.
I found that really helpful for me and for others I've worked with, to get that clarity, because then you think, okay, I've got this. I want to make an impact at scale, and then how does that work?
Yeah.
And that can cross across all the stuff you do.
Yeah. It's interesting you talking about that, like from because the corporate perspective as well, which I think about. when you talk about giving and making money, I know a lot of people that have got to the end of well, not a lot, but I've known a few people that they've chosen careers to make money because that was the right thing to do, to have a secure family and things like that. And now near the end of their careers, they're not really happy people, because they're older people, and we've had those discussions, and they've said, if I could do it again, I would do something differently. But I didn't choose right. I chose that money. But I was thinking about what you're talking about there with giving as well. And I noticed from a corporate perspective, I've always gone in with the intention of, how can I make this better? How can I do things better? What can I give to do that? And I've found from that, it doesn't mean that I always get back from the same organization, but I've found I've actually got far more in return than I've actually given out. And I'm just wondering how much of that relates back to, because I found it pretty easy to get the things that I've wanted, but largely I think it's because I've given first. Whereas I find, and I was thinking back to, you mentioned before about that intention, if you go to a networking event, because you want a client or something like that, you're projecting that out, and people are feeling that and they're getting scared off. Whereas, and the same token, if you're about making money, it's a lot of hard work to do that because people feel that. Whereas if you go with the intention of, okay, how can I help these people? And it doesn't mean you always get a return. I said sometimes with some clients, I've done things for them where I haven't got a return. One in particular, there was a software company here, and the software was being used, and me being anally retentive that I was using the software, and I went through and just, this is not efficient, and I started making notes of how to make it more efficient, just because I can't help myself. I ended up with a 43-page report going through, change this step to this step. And I was having coffee with a friend, and I was telling him this story, and he got really interested. And I'm like, and I was getting curious as to why he was interested. And then he goes, "Okay, I'll set you up." And I've gone, "What do you mean?" He goes, I'll set you up. I said, "Set me up with who?" And he goes, "I'll set you up with the senior management." He said, "I'm one of the original investors in this software." He was a venture capitalist, and said, "I'm one of the original investors in the software. I'll set you up with a senior management. You can explain what you've said to them, and if you want to, if you want to do that." So he did. He said, and I was all excited about doing it. And so I've had this meeting with all the senior management, and it went for a day. It was supposed to be half a day. It went for a day, and I talked through everything and explained it all to them, that kind of thing. And then I think it was about 6 months later, pretty much everything that I'd told them was in their software. But it was about 6 or 7 years later, maybe it was 8 years later, that Oracle bought this company for $1.6 billion. I never charged. I never charged for that meeting, but I'm thinking about, from all the things that have happened, other things that have happened where I've got things where, I haven't had to put in a lot of effort, that kind of thing. Even though I didn't get back from them, maybe I should have charged for that meeting. But I'm wondering if I had have gone, I probably could have, but the fact that my attitude was about helping first, and sort of in other environments, I've got so much more back because my attitude was exactly the same as that. The attitude stayed the same.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to, and it's always hard in business. It's not attaching outcomes, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's I'm not. It's not into the woo woo stuff of things, but actually, it's the long term piece, and you don't know why other things may have happened because of what you did then, in terms of your experience, your interaction, who you met, who they spoke to.
Yeah,
we don't always know all that, what goes on, and suddenly we get these calls or conversations with people, and suddenly we've got this business where did that come from? No idea. And I think it also takes a lot of the pressure off us as well, about performing and doing really well, and not that we're lackadaisical, not that we don't measure things. I'm not saying that, but I think it just takes things into a more macro level as opposed to just minutiae of stuff, and I think it makes it long term, and a lot of things, like having the sort of purpose driven sort of mindset, and sort of even in the business, it's a long term thing. It's not a short term ism. And I think we unfortunately live in a world of everything's going to be done in the next second. We've
Yeah.
employed this people or this agency or this coach is coming, and we expect results immediately.
Yeah.
And things don't work that way, do they?
Well,
Because
habits don't change immediately either. So.
no, I mean, I always, obviously when I engage with people, they always want to achieve stuff. Clearly, that's why they engage with me, and it's interesting. It takes time, and
Yeah.
sometimes you see clients getting frustrated at certain points where they're
Mm.
not getting, and suddenly it just goes and it happens. But it's a time thing. Because we're people. We don't know.
Yeah.
We're not robots. I'm not going in there and literally sort of tweaking and taking out old processes and putting new processes in. Metaphorically, I might be doing with some NLP, but
Yeah.
it is a time thing as well.
Do you build them into your, to how you operate, those little goals that you can show them? I remember, and I learnt this from the Victorian government long time ago. There was a lot of complaints about the roads here and that they weren't spending enough money on roads. And then shortly after that, I noticed whenever there was a road project, there was this big, massive sign at the start and finish, or we're spending X amount of money on this part of road or improving this, and we're spending X amount of, and as it turned out, the government didn't spend any more on road. It actually spent a little bit less because it was putting these big signs up telling them what they were what they were actually doing, because and how much money they were spending. So I was just wondering, do you build that into your consulting as well? These little signposts that go, here, you've got this achievement, you've achieved that.
Yeah, it's interesting because I do, because like some things, I worked with a company for a while, and in a year they increased their profits by 40%.
Yeah.
Now wasn't all down to me.
Yeah.
But having worked with the senior management in terms of their coaching mindsets, and then doing some strategy work, there were some tangible benefits. It's always tricky sometimes with individuals, because when I go into an organization and the engagement's been paid by the sponsors of the company,
Yeah.
we do sit down and do a 3-way with the line manager of sort of goals to a point. But I remember one client, he said, I just want him to own his space. That was, and I laughed really, because it's funny, because I really liked that. I said, how do we measure that then? And he said, oh, well, I'll know. I went, okay, interesting. But to be honest, and the coachee that's what he wanted as well. And it's an interesting one, because it's not measurable really. I mean, how do you know? It's very subjective. But I quite like that, because that's what they wanted to observe and feel, that sort of thing. And interesting, halfway through the engagement, I talked to the line manager just more about what you're observing. They said, I think he's really owning his space. And so that was obviously a win for them, and things were changing. And I said, well, how is he doing that? Well, he's having this impact on so and so, and suddenly it got more detailed of what that meant. That's almost like a how question. And then, interestingly, the actual coachee said, "Oh, all my friends have noticed a difference in me, and when I go to sort of family engagement, and said, even somebody said the other day, you just seem to be owning your space." And that phrase came out, and it's really weird. And so, yeah, but I just then asked the question of how the specifics of that came out, and what were you noticing? And so we do get caught up with goals, but actually sometimes it's just a matter of sense of knowing it. And but yeah, sometimes they're tangible, but sometimes they're not so tangible. But people know there's a difference.
Yeah, I was wondering, as you were talking about that, because again, coming back to the Christmas and festive season theme, it's like, how do we know, like, we're owning our own space, or how do we set okay, this is what we want for the Christmas? Because we keep coming back to that whole thing of we're creating stress and tension, that kind of thing. But if we haven't set the intention of what we want to achieve, and it's not clear to us, how can we even achieve it?
Yeah, and I think you can make it, as we talked about, specific in terms of goals, and make it the old sort of SMART type goals, but that feels slightly I don't know, slightly crass really in the sense of this. But I think intentions is okay. Just the fact that I had my intention as a dad to be the best dad I can be.
Yeah.
That's not, in the world of SMART. Well, that's not very smart, because it's not specific enough. How are you going to measure it?
Yeah.
But do you know what? That's good enough for me.
Mm,
And I think sometimes, you know, just saying what I'd like to have happen this Christmas is to have this, of some real intentions, and that's good enough. I think we don't need to get caught up. I think as long as our direction of travel is towards something that's more positive and life giving and sort of empowering, then let's not get too caught up on the specifics. If it's I just want to own my space,
yeah,
that to me is, and we know what that means, or they know what that means, probably
yeah,
more than what I and that's a personalized thing. But just set your sort of your direction of travel that way. I think that's good enough. I don't think we need to get too caught up on, oh, I need to have 3 conversations with Uncle Bill, and at least 2 out of 3 of them have got to be on a positive scale, whatever that means, and all this sort of stuff. No, I just want to have a good chat with him at Christmas, get
yeah,
to know him better, or you know, find out what was he like before his accident.
yeah. Now that's interesting because I do. You mentioned SMART goals there, and I've wondered about that being maybe counterproductive. And I think about it like really where my life shifted was when I set a mission statement for myself. And the mission statement was as simple as, simpler it is. This is what my personal mission statement is. I enjoy life and sharing the joys of others. I learn something daily that increases my ability to overachieve and confidently and compassionately act from my values of honesty, excellence, and understanding. And that was my definition of success. Did I do something, did I enjoy the day?
Mm.
Didn't matter what it was. Did I enjoy something about the day? Did I learn something that helped me? And I put overachieve there because I couldn't help myself. I couldn't just have it. Do I learn something new? It's like to help me overachieve. But yeah, I mean, and that generally, as far as I can recall, happens every day where I find something. Okay, what did I learn today that's going to make me better tomorrow? And there's something there. And to confidently and compassionately. Well, confidence is, I mean, as you know, it's a choice. It's not something you can't go to the shelf and a supermarket and buy confidence. It's something you choose to do. And compassionate, the same sort of thing. To be compassionate towards others, to have empathy. Again, that's a choice to listen. And obviously, they're my choice of values. And my primary values is honesty, excellence, and understanding. And from that, that setting that simple intention just made my life, I said, basically successful every day.
Yeah.
And no matter what Christmas party or what Uncle Bill does, and maybe that's when that shifted. If I think about back to that time when I actually wrote that mission statement and have lived by that for as to the best of my ability since I did write it. But that really comes back. There's nothing smart about that, like from the sense of SMART goals.
No.
It's not measurable. I mean, we'll learn something new, but what is learning something new?
And I think, do you know what? The more I've come from a background of being very, smart goals and
mm,
specific, and that there's a place for them. I'm not
yeah,
saying we don't throw it all out. There is a place
yeah,
for them.
true.
But I think in terms of, certainly from a personal perspective, you know, and having the right, intention, mission, is probably more powerful and more impactful. And I think also, I think sometimes smart goals, when you set them at that point in time of what you knew.
Mm,
As you move forward in life, and this is where we do need to reevaluate sometimes goals as you go. Was it? I've heard the acronym SMARTER goals. And the E and R stand for E's for evaluate, and R is for readjust.
okay.
And so, actually, when you get to a point, because when you set them, you set it on the basis of what you know and what you'd like to achieve.
Yeah.
And as you move forward, things happen and change, and you might need to. But often people get caught up in not changing them because I can't change them because I've set them now, and so and it becomes a little bit of a, I don't know, a bit of a, almost like a handcuffs to them, and that's it. I've got to stick to it. But actually, not the right thing that right now. I need to change and do something differently. So that's where I think a mission statement becomes a far more open-minded and creates more perspective and potential opportunities, because it's a living thing as you go. It's
Mm.
always there with you where you're heading towards. You don't really ever get to it. You know what I mean? And so
It's a
that
way
kind
of
of keeps
being.
you. Yes, yes, being. Yes, that's a good thing rather than just doing, which is what goals sort of get you into doing stuff.
Yeah.
Just being, and when you're around people who are being that sort of purposeful or inspiring, they don't have to do a lot. Do you know what I mean? Because they're
Yeah.
just who they are, and I think that's the point. And I often, my daughters get into a place where look for opportunity just to be with them, not
Yeah.
to always do stuff. We do stuff together, but just to be with them. Sit in an evening, watch Netflix, don't speak to each other while watching a film. They're on the phone, but I'm just being, and that's great. Just being with somebody is great as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. And maybe that's the lesson for Christmas is just be with the people that you're with rather than trying to
Mm.
create a whole expectation. It's got to be a certain way, but just be. Maybe is that the underlying where we got to after nearly 2 hours of talking
Yes,
of
I think
pondering,
that
2 hours of pondering.
2 hours of pondering, and I think just be,
Yeah.
and be is being in the moment, isn't it? And
Yeah.
being in the moment is where you're fully alive and
Yeah.
fully aware and fully in control,
Yeah.
and and when you're fully in the moment with somebody else and you're
Mm.
with somebody who's with you fully present, it's fabulous, isn't it? It's amazing. You just like,
Yeah.
yeah, like we've been present with each other for the last 2 hours.
Yeah.
That's the best place to be. Nothing, no distractions, just completely present.
Yeah. So, Uncle Bill, what is it that really frustrates you about the government? I'd really love to hear about that. Tell me what that is, and get into that. I mean, and I think that's, I mean, from my perspective, to that being with people. And I said that was a big shift from my life because a lot of times I always felt the need to, in a conversation that you had to talk, that you had to,
Mm.
get your point. Oh, I guess it wasn't even get your point across, but you know, to I think it was like wanting to help people, and so I wanted to share. Oh no, this will help you. This will help you was my intention. But it
Mm.
was when I actually learned that it's more about listening to people, just to be with them and listen to their story, let them share
Yeah.
their experience. That's when I created much deeper relationships with people.
Mm.
Mm.
Yeah. I mean, I've had many coaching sessions with clients where they might talk for 10, 15 minutes
Mm.
and they will end up resolving their issues, change their own mindsets,
Yeah,
and I'm just being and being holding that space for them to listen with value and sort of and everything else, and that can be quite powerful in itself. Listening is a powerful intervention, and I say just being, and
mm.
actually, oh, that's really good, thanks for that. And I'm thinking, well, I actively listened and aware, and so I think it's I think, and also just be mindful of, you know, we've never walked a mile in people's sort of feet, really. I know that's an
Yeah,
expression, and we don't really know what's going on in their lives, and we try and second guess. We try and guess motives, but you
yeah,
can't guess a motive. You have no idea about motives. Half people don't know their own motives,
yeah,
um,
true.
and just be a bit more mindful that actually you don't know why they are the way they are. Why they're so negative? Why they're a
Mm.
nightmare? Why they struggle with Christmas? Why are they who they are? You don't know, and just
Yeah.
be a little bit more, I guess, compassionate with that, and understand, not in a patronizing way, but just
No,
as that can really help you with that conversation. You just come a bit more away understanding. Yeah.
I think you're right there too. That whole point of you're almost projecting onto them about what their feelings are because you can't know what their feelings are or their experiences are because you haven't walked in their shoes. And when you're projecting onto someone, you're not being with them. You're projecting. Um,
Mm.
that's actually really profound. What you've mentioned there with this being. It's that I think that is the secret of Christmas. To happy Christmas is just be with people.
Perfect. With no agenda, no outcomes.
Love it.
Just just be. Excellent.
Well,
We just could have had a 1 minute conversation about that 2 hours ago.
that's really fascinating. Julian, I mean, It's always a pleasure having a chat with you. This is amazing. And I think we've covered a lot of topics off, but I think we have to go through that journey to actually get to the simple answer.
Yeah.
I think that's certainly been my life. I've gone through some really terrible stuff to get to the simple answer. Okay, that's all I need to do. I just need to be.
Totally. It's quite profound, really, isn't it? And what I love about that, it's really simple, and anybody can do it.
Exactly. Well, we might want to. I mean, you've probably got things to do, and it's evening here, so I'm gonna wrap up and have a bit of a rest. Julian, it's always a pleasure chatting with you. Looking forward to, hopefully you have a wonderful Christmas and just being with your family. No doubt you will.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to being with my family over Christmas and just enjoying and listening to the stories of Uncle Bill.
Excellent. Brilliant, Damien. Really enjoyed chatting to you. It's been great.
Fantastic. Thank you, Julian.
Thank you. Cheers. Bye.
Thank you for being part of the Share.care community and helping people around the world prosper. You're creating a bigger pie for everyone to share. The more people contributing to the world being a better place, the better the world becomes, for others and for you.